Hello friends, welcome on in to Behind the Builds. These videos will go over mine and Stacey's builds from Season 3 of LEGO Masters US, giving you insight into the building techniques we used, the things that we did well on each build, and things that we could have improved on. Today's video will be covering episodes 1 through 4, so let's dive on in. Episode 1 was called Ready to Launch. Teams had 13 hours to build a spaceship representing their team that would be docked on a large space station. For this challenge, each team was given a little docking module, which looks something like this, albeit a little bit bigger, that would slide onto some large beams on the spaceship and then could be locked in with some plates on the top and on the bottom. So it was really important that we took advantage of these 2 rows of Technic that were available on the docking module and to ensure our whole build would be really strong around that. So when we started working on the build, I immediately made sure that we were working around Technic. So the 2 main techniques we used in this build were interlocking Technic beams that ran pretty much the full length of the body of the ship. We actually had 2 full rows running all the way down the ship to ensure that that strength was being carried through right from the back. You can actually see we have 2 beams, 2 longer Technic pieces kind of offset and interlocked that way so that they're all kind of interconnected, and we've got Technic pins locking those together. And then for the front of the ship, we used a little bit of a different technique, taking advantage of stop bricks and brackets, which when wrapped with a couple layers of plates or curve slopes, become really strong and rigid and allow for a very strong build. I've used this in things like my LEGO lightsaber in the past, which you can obviously see is very strong. And we ensured to interlock those 2 different techniques together. So on the actual build, we kind of had lots of plate and other things kind of overlapping the 2 rows of Technic beams in and locking that in together with these front antennas to ensure the build was nice and strong. One other benefit of the way we did the front here is that we actually have the LEGO math working it where we can kind of line things up so that way we can get those nice smooth rings on the antennas. And then it was very important, of course, to ensure that we lock these Technic layers together. So at different parts in the build, we actually did lock them together with some little Technic beams and then built around them to cover them up. One thing to note with a technique like this is that it's good to plan ahead. I admittedly did not plan ahead as much as I should have, and so I actually had a very hard time getting our build locked onto the module. And I had built a bunch of it, and then I had to like kind of split open the whole build to slip it over to where the Technic pins can lock in, which once I managed to do it successfully, and I was able to very luckily, you can see the build is quite strong. I can kind of hold it from the very back of it, and the whole build stays nice and solid, which was just like our real build. Some things that I've really liked about our build was that it had a very fun spaceship look. I think it kind of tied into me and Stacey's world of live streaming with the bright purple color and the big antennas. I do think what might have helped our build kind of maybe take the win, because we did actually place top 2 for this build, but we didn't get the win, unfortunately. And I think that's because when you looked at it, you didn't quite immediately know what the story of the spaceship was. It looked like a fun spaceship. It had some cool antennas. And as you studied it more with some up-close details, like in the interior, you would see it's for live streaming. But unlike the Firefighters build, you looked at it and you knew what that was for right away. And I think that's what gave them the win for that challenge. So overall, we did do well with our build. It was a lot of fun, and I think people enjoyed it. But it didn't get us the win. That build is in the books. Let's move on to episode 2. Episode 2 was Jurassic World, which gave teams 12 hours to build a scene featuring dinosaurs living among humans that had to incorporate awesome special effects. For this challenge, each team was provided with a very large base. It was at least 100 studs on each side, which meant we had a lot of space to cover in not a lot of time. When we came up with our idea for the trick-or-treat scene, I did want to ensure that even though we didn't have a lot of time, I wanted to make sure our build wasn't too flat. It'd be very easy to build a house straight and the road straight, and that would kind of just mean all of the details of the build were straight. And we knew it was important that the camera would be looking from one particular angle, just to the front. So any work we did on the side of the house would kind of be lost to that angle. So I said, let's build everything on an angle. So we use some wedge plates, just like we do on this mini build here, to build the road at an angle. And we use some single stud connections to allow us to angle the tiles or the road lines. And then for the house, we actually just kind of carved out an angled area, again, using wedge plates. And we just actually sat the house in that area. I don't even think we had any stud connections on it. So you could literally lift out the whole house out at any time, but it was a nice and easy way to ensure that we could work on the house off of the base and then bring it onto it afterwards. So a really good way to work on it. For this build, we did decide to also do a brick-built dinosaur, which I think was one of the things that helped us stay out of the bottom too. But I actually spent probably a good hour or two of that time working on a motorized function for the build. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that function working the way I wanted to. I used a very bad method of trying to get the dinosaur to move. I think I was trying to get it to do this rocking forward motion, but the build was way too heavy for that. And looking back on it now, I realized there would have been a much easier technique to use for that, which would be something similar to what we have on our little test board here. This is actually something I built to help me practice for LEGO Masters. Basically gave me a way to practice all sorts of motion and, you know, levers and tilting things and angular things, just so I had an idea of how, you know, LEGO pieces can interact and how I might be able to add functions or movement. And so if we turn this on, you'll see I have a couple different forms of motion. Rotational motion, which is always a good one to know. And then we have two different types of angular motion, where we basically have a little bit of kind of a looping rotation here, and then a left, right wiggle here. And then on the very end here, this is the important one. I'm going to turn this off again. This allows for basically just straight side-to-side motion. But you could also take this and easily make it have direct up and down motion. So what I should have done for our dinosaur was basically build some sort of hidden platform, and I did actually do some bushing underneath the dinosaur to hide some of the functionality, but I essentially just created a big piston that was very strong, that went up and down, that could have raised the dinosaur up and down and allowed it to tilt up and down like that very, very easily. And with the motors that we had on the show, we could slow them down and stuff, so that it would be just a nice subtle motion, and I think that would have helped our build stand out a lot more. So I really wish we had done that, but otherwise I was quite happy with the build, and I think we're ready to move on to episode 3. One last thing I wish we would have done differently was the silhouette trees in the background. I made them summery trees. They really should have looked like spooky trees to fit that Halloween vibe. Episode 3 was the Brickin Bull Ride Rodeo, where teams had 11 hours to build a bull rider to try to last as long as possible on an actual mechanical bull. Each build in this challenge would be judged 50% based on aesthetics and 50% based on strength. But there was an important catch. The team whose build lasted the longest on the mechanical bull would win the golden brick. So me and Stacey decided kind of right off the bat we were going to target that really intensely. And obviously we weren't going to build something ugly, but we were going to put a lot more time and effort into the strength of our build. And we did end up finishing second. And I do think there are some reasons why we didn't quite take the lead, but I do think our core technique for strengthening this build was very good, and I'm going to show you why. So this is a little sample mock-up of how we strengthened our build. It essentially tied Technic into the base of the build. So we've got these like L-shaped or J-shaped Technic beams, and we had them on all 4 sides of our build. And I think we actually had 2 of these going up each side. So there were actually 8 of these in total tied into the build. And so they were locked into Technic bricks on the base, which we locked into the bowl. And what we did to ensure that these would not go anywhere at all was we used several layers of plates. And when I say several, I'm talking like probably like 7, 8, 9, or 10. And Stacey, unfortunately, had to do a lot of that hammering of those plates onto the build because we used a lot of big, large plates. But the concept is kind of this, in that you just stack up tons of layers of plates and you press them really tight. And for whatever reason, when you get lots of plates together, they create this crazy strong friction, kind of like how we did it for the handles on our Captain America shields. Literally just all plate. Trust me when I say that handle goes nowhere because it's so strong. So that was a really important part of our build, and I think that's what allowed it to stay on for so long. Even though it was so tall, these plates held down the build for quite some time, which was really, really great. We of course made sure we tied that into a kind of studs up normal core with some brackets on it. So again, we had lots of big Technic bricks and beams running up the sides here on all 4 sides of our build. And luckily, thanks to some Lego math, we could actually interconnect the sides of the builds to the front and back of the build as well. So the whole build was kind of wrapped in plate as well, which allowed that strength to be carried all the way up and through the build. Where I think our biggest problem is that we actually made our build too tall. We did have a height requirement of 30 inches from the bottom of the feet to the top of the build, but I actually built the core so high up that we had to kind of build taller than we intended, because there was no backtracking on the core once it was built. So I actually made a mistake in building the core too big, and our build ended up being, I think, about 36 to 38 inches tall, so several inches taller than it needed to be. And I think it was all that weight at the top of the build that slowly rocked this off of the base, and that's what unfortunately caused Bella to fly off eventually. But that's some insight into the episode 3 build But let's move on to episode 4. The final episode we'll be covering here was Out on a Limb. It was a 10-hour challenge where teams had to build a treehouse on an actual tree that had no Lego-based connection points. This was mine and Stacey's first challenge win, which was super duper exciting. And I think there were two main things that contributed to that. One had to do with the concept of the build, in that you could look at this build and you knew exactly what it was. It was kids letting their imagination run wild, all centered around their love of a Lego building. It was obviously, of course, a big icon that you could not mistake from no matter how far you were from it. And it was just easily decodable. You could kind of walk up to it, see a cardboard monster, see a kid playing with it, see a kid playing pirates, see a kid playing as a firefighter, see a kid playing inside the house. And you knew what all of those things were without someone actually telling you. And I think that's what edged us over some of the other teams in this challenge. Was some of the other Treehouses were really cool, but you had to hear their story to fully grasp what the story behind the build was. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind when you are tackling a LEGO Master Challenge, is how quickly and easily can someone understand what your build is without hearing a story. Obviously, that doesn't apply to story-based challenges, where it's very important that you talk about the story, but it's something to keep in mind. Otherwise, I do think another thing that helped us with this build was how we approached the build and how we integrated our build into our tree. Essentially what we did was we built a giant frame of the brick, and then we measured it up against the tree to see where all of the different branches and stem of the tree were going to line up on our build. And we planned to build our build around the tree branch, just like I have built a wall around this ruler, which was the closest thing I could find to a tree branch at the moment. So what we did to ensure that this build would be nice and strong was we, measured where we needed to build it, kind of matched the shape around it as much as we could using both plate and brick. And then we made sure to put Technic bricks on the top and bottom of wherever the connection over the branch was happening, so that no matter what, the build was fully locked in around it on both the top and the bottom, so that you could shake this no matter how much you tried, but there would be no way to kind of separate this without removing the two Technic bricks. So this is a really great way to lock things in for strength. I can't stress the importance enough of Technic in general for making a build really strong. And this just gave us a really great way to ensure that we could build directly on and around the tree, but also ensure we had the strength there to lock it in. So of course, planning where these Technic pins would go was extremely important to ensure that we had flexibility for locking these in afterwards, because you could build quite a bit and then realize, oh my gosh, I forgot to put the Technic brick in, and then you got to backtrack all of a sudden. One other thing I do want to mention really quickly is planning places to build things off of later. So one thing that I did all throughout the build was, let's say this was a tree branch, and then I wanted to have a little shelf of something built around this part of of our treehouse later. I actually integrated Technic bricks into the sides of our builds that I left exposed, that I came back to hours later and added the little blue and yellow platforms on the side too. So kind of thinking ahead and going, okay, if I want to add some stuff to our build later, what do I need to integrate now so that it's easy for me to add? So always get to keep those things in mind as well, and that'll help you win a LEGO Masters Challenge too. And that's a wrap on our first Behind the Builds video. Please don't be afraid to hop into the comments and let me know if you have any questions about anything you saw in this video, or if you have suggestions for future videos like this as well, so I can get you the best information possible and ensure that maybe if you're on LEGO Masters someday, you're as well prepared as possible. Otherwise, just thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon. Happy building out there.